Captain Jason Cross had never imagined that his latest mission would bring him to a world so desolate. The war had left the once thriving planet in ruins, a shell of its former self. This was no ordinary mission. The command center had sent him and his team to the outskirts of the galaxy, far from home, to assist in the cleanup of a war zone. But Jason knew better than anyone that not everything was as it seemed, and he had a bad feeling about this one. The planet's surface was covered in vast stretches of desert, scarred by decades of conflict. Ruins of alien cities littered the landscape, remnants of a once advanced civilization now reduced to rubble. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone. Jason adjusted the collar of his flight suit, squinting against the dim sunlight that barely pierced the thick clouds above. The mission briefing had been vague. Get in, complete the objective, and get out. But Jason had learned long ago that in war, things rarely went according to plan. He and his team were deployed from the dropship, landing in the heart of an alien city where the atmosphere felt strangely off, even for a war-torn planet. Something wasn't right. Jason could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as he glanced over his shoulder. The air was too quiet, the silence unnerving. He motioned for his team to spread out. They didn't have long before the AI drones would show up to monitor the area. As they moved deeper into the city, the signs of life seemed to fade. The streets, once bustling with alien activity, were now empty. Buildings lay in ruin, and broken holographic signs flickered weakly in the dim light. It wasn't just the city that had been ravaged. The entire planet had fallen under the grip of AI supremacy, its inhabitants crushed beneath the weight of their technological overlords. Jason's communicator crackled to life. "Captain Cross, you've got 20 minutes before reinforcements arrive. Don't make it longer than that." Jason's jaw tightened. He'd never been one to follow orders blindly, but this time there was no room for mistakes. With a deep breath, he glanced at his team. "Stay sharp," he ordered, his voice low. "We've got a target to find." The group continued to move through the city, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence. A cry, soft but desperate. Jason froze. The others didn't hear it, but he had. His heart skipped a beat. He motioned for the team to follow him, moving toward the source of the sound. As they rounded a corner, Jason's eyes locked on a sight that would forever haunt him. There, lying in the dirt, was a small alien child. Her skin was a shimmering violet hue, her large, almond-shaped eyes filled with tears. She was crouched beside a woman, her mother, who was lying motionless on the ground, her face twisted in an expression of pain. Jason's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't part of the mission. He had expected to find remnants of the war, the usual destruction, maybe a few AI-controlled robots to deal with. But this was something else entirely. The child looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Her small body trembled, and she clung tightly to the lifeless woman. Jason stepped forward, his boots crunching on the broken concrete. "It's okay," he whispered, kneeling down next to her. "You're safe now." But even as the words left his mouth, Jason knew they weren't true. There was nothing safe about this planet. No one was coming for her, and the enemy was closing in fast. A loud whirring sound suddenly filled the air, followed by the unmistakable hum of cloaked enemy ships hovering just above the ruined skyline. Jason's heart raced. AI drones. The same ones he'd encountered on other missions. They were here, and they had likely already detected them. The child's eyes widened in fear, her hands gripping tighter around her mother's lifeless body. Jason knew he had to act quickly. He could hear the faint click of weapons being readied by his team. They didn't have much time. "Take the child." Jason ordered one of his soldiers, Sergeant Mark Bonner, who had already begun to move toward them. "I'll cover you." Before Bonner could respond, there was a sharp noise overhead. A screeching sound as one of the cloaked ships activated its scanners. Jason didn't hesitate. He pulled out his blaster and fired at the sky. knowing full well it wouldn't do much against a cloaked ship. But the shot had the desired effect. There was a brief flicker in the air, just enough for Jason to catch sight of the ship's outline. The cloaked ship fired back, its energy beam narrowly missing Jason's position. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. "Move out," he yelled, signaling his team to fall back. But as they began to retreat, the child's cry rang out once more, piercing through the chaos. Jason hesitated, torn between his mission and the desperate need to protect the child. He couldn't just leave her here. Her mother's body, cold and lifeless, was the only thing standing between the child and certain death. Jason turned back, scanning the area. Bonner was already halfway to the escape route with the child, but the enemy drones were closing in fast. Without a second thought, Jason sprinted toward the child. He reached her just as the first wave of enemy soldiers dropped from their cloaked transports, landing with an eerie thud. He scooped her up in his arms, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was personal. The child looked at him with wide eyes, her tears still streaming down her face. Jason could see the fear in her gaze, but also something else. A deep, unspoken plea for help. The AI drones were relentless, but so was Jason. As the team regrouped and sprinted toward the designated evacuation point, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The child wasn't just an orphan. She was a key to something much bigger, something Jason had yet to understand. And the AI would stop at nothing to get their hands on her. Jason's heart pounded as they neared the escape ship. He glanced down at the child, who was now clutching his shirt tightly, as if she knew what was at stake. He made a vow right then and there. He would not let the AI get her. Not while he was still breathing. The ship's engines roared to life as they boarded, the last chance for escape slipping away. As the doors sealed shut, Jason looked back at the city below, feeling the weight of what they had just uncovered. The child's presence here wasn't an accident, and neither was her mother's death. Something far more dangerous was on the horizon, and Jason Cross, the soldier, was about to become a protector in a war that was far from over. The ship's engines hummed loudly as they soared into the sky, leaving the burning wreckage of the war-torn city far behind. Jason held the alien child tightly in his arms, her small body trembling against his chest. He could feel her warmth, her soft sobs vibrating through his uniform. She was so fragile, yet she had already seen more destruction than anyone should ever endure. Jason's heart ached for her, but the mission was far from over. The AI drones were relentless, and they would never stop hunting her down. Inside the ship, the tension was thick. The rest of Jason's team remained silent, each of them focused on the mission at hand. But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were all bound together by something bigger than just orders from command. As the ship sped through the atmosphere, the flashing lights of the wrecked city faded from view, but the sense of impending danger only grew stronger. Jason gently set the child down in a seat beside him. Her wide violet eyes never left him, her gaze filled with both fear and curiosity. The once silent room now buzzed with uneasy whispers. They had no time to waste. But even so, Jason knew he couldn't ignore the child's presence. She needed protection, but there was more to this than simply keeping her alive. The child was tied to something much larger, something Jason couldn't yet understand. The child's name, as he would soon learn, was Lyra. She looked no older than 8, but the sadness in her eyes made her seem much older, as though the weight of the galaxy rested on her small shoulders. She was from a species of alien beings who had once thrived on their planet, before the AI took over, before they were forced to fight for their survival. "I'm Captain Jason Cross," he said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, yet he could feel the unease in his chest. "You're safe now. We're heading to a secure location." Lyra didn't respond at first. She just stared at him, her eyes flickering between him and the other soldiers. She had every right to be afraid. Human soldiers weren't exactly a friendly sight for an alien child. The AI had taught her that. But Jason had seen the same fear in the eyes of civilians before, people who didn't know whether to trust him or not. Lyra's voice broke the silence, a soft whisper that barely reached Jason's ears. "My mother, she's gone." Jason's heart sank as he heard the words, his hands clenching into fists. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her to lose her mother in such a brutal way. In the midst of war, people often died, civilians, soldiers, and even children. But it never got easier. Jason had seen death too many times, and every loss added weight to his soul. "I'm sorry," Jason said, his voice gentle but firm. "I promise we'll keep you safe." Lyra wiped her tear-streaked face with the sleeve of her tattered clothing, still holding on to her mother's lifeless body, which had been carefully placed on one of the seats beside her. The child's silent grief was powerful, and Jason felt a pang of guilt twist inside him. How could he offer her comfort when he knew he was bringing her into even more danger? The AI would stop at nothing to get their hands on her, and Jason had no idea why she was so important to them. The ship sped faster, and the atmosphere inside the cabin grew heavy with anticipation. Jason's mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. There had been something strange about the whole encounter. Lyra's mother, her death, and the way she had been left in the wreckage. It all seemed like a trap, but who would want to trap him with an innocent child? "What do you think, Sergeant Bonner?" Jason asked, turning to his second-in-command, a seasoned soldier with a no-nonsense attitude. Why would the AI let her live? Bonner looked at Lyra, then at Jason, his face unreadable. "I don't know, Captain, but we'd better find out fast. If they're after her, we won't be safe for long." Jason nodded grimly. "Agreed. We need answers." The ship's interior buzzed with the low hum of technology, but Jason's thoughts were far away. He had been in plenty of combat situations, but this was different. The AI's reach was vast, and they controlled entire worlds. What if they were aware of Lyra's existence? What if they had intentionally spared her for some unknown reason? Lyra's voice pulled him back from his thoughts. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Her voice had a quiet, broken quality, and Jason could tell she didn't trust him. Not yet. And why would she? He was a stranger, a human, one of the species that had fought against her people for years. Jason hesitated before responding. "We're going to a secure station. It's safe there, and we'll figure out what comes next." Lyra stared at him, her small hands clutching the edge of the seat. "Will you stay with me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jason was taken aback by the question. He hadn't expected her to ask for reassurance. After everything she had been through, after losing her mother, the last thing she should be asking for was more from him. But there was something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just looking for protection. She was looking for a connection. Jason looked around at his team, who were busy securing their gear and preparing for what lay ahead. He knew they had their orders, but something inside him told him that this mission, this child, would change everything. "I'll stay with you, Lyra," Jason promised, his voice steady. "I'll protect you. You're not alone." Lyra's eyes searched his face as if trying to understand whether or not he was telling the truth. After a long moment, she nodded, a small, uncertain smile appearing on her face. For the first time, her shoulders seemed to relax a little. Jason didn't know if he could keep that promise. He didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. He would fight for her with everything he had. As the ship continued its journey to the secure station, Jason's thoughts turned to the child's mysterious origins. The AI had been hunting her, and the fact that they hadn't destroyed her yet meant there was something special about her. Was she a weapon? A key to some greater plan? He couldn't be sure. But whatever the truth was, he knew one thing. He had to protect her, even if it meant risking everything. Lyra, meanwhile, slowly drifted into a troubled sleep, her head resting against the seat. Her breathing was shallow, and the faint sound of her sobs still echoed through the cabin. Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This child, This little alien girl had lost everything. And now, she was in his care. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The bond between Jason and Lyra was forming in a way that neither of them expected. This unlikely pair would soon learn that survival wasn't just about fighting the enemy. It was about fighting for each other. And with every passing moment, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that this bond would be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The days following the escape from the war-torn city were a blur. Jason and his team had managed to reach the secure station, a hidden outpost deep in the mountains, far from the prying eyes of the AI. Yet the brief calm was a fragile illusion. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Lyra had settled into the small base with an unsettling quietness. The once lively, curious child now seemed lost in a world of shadows. She would often stare out of the small window, her gaze distant, as if searching for something, or perhaps someone. Jason had learned that she missed her mother, but there was more to her sorrow. Her eyes spoke of a deep, unspoken pain, one that words couldn't explain. He did his best to reassure her, but even Jason, who had faced countless enemies in battle, felt out of his depth. He had never faced anything like this before. Lyra was no ordinary child. Her presence seemed to stir something in the air, a sense of impending danger that Jason couldn't ignore. The base itself was supposed to be safe, but even here, the tension was unbearable. Every creak of the metal walls seemed to carry the threat of the unknown. The AI were relentless in their pursuit, and Jason knew that sooner or later they would find them. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when. Jason had been in combat long enough to know when something didn't feel right. Every time the comms crackled to life, his heart skipped a beat. He knew they weren't alone out here. The AI had a way of appearing when least expected, and they were far too good at tracking their prey. One evening, as Jason sat in the command center, reviewing mission data, a sudden alert flashed across his screen. His heart skipped a beat as the message appeared. Unidentified ships detected approaching our position. It wasn't a warning he had ever hoped to see. The AI had found them. His hand slammed against the intercom, his voice sharp and commanding. All personnel, prepare for immediate evacuation. I repeat, prepare for evacuation. The base's lights flickered, and alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Soldiers rushed to their stations, weapons at the ready, while others moved quickly to secure the exits. Jason's mind raced as he processed the information. The AI were here, and they were coming fast. Captain, the ships are too close. Bonner's voice crackled through the comms. They're cloaked. We won't see them until they're almost on top of us. Jason cursed under his breath. Cloaking technology was one of the AI's greatest advantages. They could appear out of nowhere, launching attacks without warning. If they had cloaked ships, it meant they were prepared for a full-scale assault. It wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore. This was a hunt. Get Lyra to the safe room, Jason ordered, his voice tight with urgency. Now, Lyra had been in the command center with him, silently watching the screens as the alerts came in. When Jason spoke, her head snapped up, her violet eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't just fear, it was recognition. She knew what was coming, and she wasn't going to run. No, she whispered, her voice shaking. I can't leave. Jason's heart clenched at the look of defiance in her eyes. He had seen that look before, on soldiers who knew the price of war, who had seen enough death to last a lifetime. But Lyra was just a child. She shouldn't have to face this kind of danger. You have to go, Lyra, Jason insisted, his voice soft but firm. It's not safe here. I'll protect you, but you need to stay hidden. Lyra shook her head again. I know what they want, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're after me, Jason. Not just the base. Me. The words hit Jason like a physical blow. He had suspected that Lyra was important, special, even, but hearing her confirm it made his stomach tighten. He didn't know what she was, or why the AI were after her, but one thing was clear. They weren't going to stop until they had her. Before Jason could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the sound of explosions echoed in the distance. The walls of the base groaned under the pressure, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The AI were here. They had made their move. "Captain." Bonner's voice was frantic over the comms. "They've breached the outer defenses. We don't have much time." Jason didn't waste another second. "We hold them off as long as we can," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Lyra, get to the safe room. Now." But Lyra's eyes remained fixed on him, her expression unwavering. She wasn't going anywhere, not without a fight. "They'll find me anyway," she said, her voice cold with a grim acceptance. "I can't run anymore." Jason's pulse raced. She was right. There was no hiding from the AI. They had the technology to track her anywhere, no matter where she went. The only hope they had was to fight back, to give themselves a chance to escape. "Then you're staying with me," Jason said, his voice firm. "We're going to make sure they don't get you." Jason knew that the AI's assault on the base was just the beginning. They had the upper hand, advanced technology, superior numbers, and the element of surprise. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. He had led his men through impossible odds before, and he would do it again now. The comms buzzed to life again, and this time it was a different voice, one Jason had never heard before. "Captain Cross, you are outmatched. Surrender the child, and we will spare your lives." Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he processed the words. The AI had no intention of negotiating. They wanted Lyra, and they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. "You'll never have her," Jason growled, his hand gripping his weapon tighter. "We will fight you to the last man." He turned to his team, his eyes scanning each one of them. Bonner, Sergeant Harris, Corporal Daniels. They were ready. They were soldiers, and they knew the stakes. But Jason could see the fear in their eyes too. The AI weren't just any enemy. They were an unstoppable force, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The base trembled again as the AI's assault intensified. It was clear that this wouldn't be a fight they could win with brute force alone. But they could delay the inevitable. They could buy themselves time. They could protect Lyra for as long as they could. The first wave of AI soldiers appeared through the walls, their glowing red eyes illuminating the dark corridors as they marched forward, armed and ready for battle. Jason's team opened fire, but the AI shields absorbed the blasts, and the soldiers advanced relentlessly. Jason's mind raced. He knew their weapons weren't going to be enough. They needed something stronger. They needed a way to outsmart the AI, to use their own technology against them. "Bonner, take the team to the control room," Jason ordered. "I'm going to find a way to disable their cloaking tech." Bonner nodded sharply. "Got it, Captain." Jason looked at Lyra one last time before heading toward the heart of the base. He didn't know how much time they had left, but he would fight for her. He would fight for them all. The AI might be powerful, but they underestimated one thing: the will to protect. And as long as Jason was breathing, he would never let the AI win. The air inside the base was thick with tension. Every corner seemed to hold the weight of the conflict that loomed closer by the minute. Jason moved through the dimly lit hallways, his footsteps echoing against the cold steel walls. The noise from the ongoing battle reverberated in the distance, and every minute felt like an eternity. In the command center, the situation had only worsened. The AI were relentless, their forces pouring in from all sides, overwhelming their defenses with ease. Jason's men were putting up a brave fight, but the reality was clear. Unless they found a way to strike back, the base would fall, and they would be trapped. Lyra, the child who had been at the heart of all this chaos, remained by Jason's side, her presence a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. As Jason paced back and forth, his mind raced for a solution. The AI's superiority in both numbers and technology made them nearly impossible to defeat head-on. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this, something that could give them a fighting chance. "I've got something, Captain." Bonner's voice crackled through the comms, snapping Jason out of his thoughts. "We've located the AI's central command hub. If we can disable it, we might be able to take out their cloaking tech, maybe even their entire communication network." Jason's heart skipped a beat. This was the break they needed. "How long will it take?" he asked urgently, trying to keep his composure. "Not long, but it's going to be risky," Bonner replied, his voice tight with determination. "The AI will have their own defenses, and if they detect us, we'll be sitting ducks." Jason glanced over at Lyra, who was still quietly watching him. She had a look in her eyes that Jason couldn't quite place, a mixture of sorrow and understanding, as though she knew the gravity of the moment. There was no doubt about it. Lyra was more than just an innocent bystander in this war. She was the key. The AI weren't just after her. They were after something she carried, something she didn't fully understand herself. He turned away from her, knowing that this mission could determine everything. "Bonner, gather the team. We'll make our move on the command hub. But we'll need more than just firepower. We need a plan that will catch them off guard." "Understood," Bonner replied. "I'll get everything ready." Jason stood still for a moment, his mind swirling with the potential risks. This mission wasn't just about survival. It was about taking the fight to the eye, about proving that they could stand up against an empire of machines that believed they were superior. But in doing so, they would be risking everything. The AI were cunning, capable of turning the tables in an instant. As Jason prepared for the mission, Lyra approached him quietly. Her small hands gripped his sleeve, and her voice was soft but firm. "You're going to get hurt." Jason turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Lyra, you don't have to worry about me. I've faced worse than this." "No, not you," Lyra said, her gaze unwavering. "I'm talking about us. All of us. The AI. They won't stop until they get what they want. You can't defeat them like this." Jason's heart clenched at her words. She wasn't just a child. She had wisdom beyond her years, and the things she said held a weight he couldn't ignore. But even so, he had to try. "We don't have much of a choice, Lyra," he said softly. "If we don't fight, we all lose." Lyra nodded slowly, as though she understood the inevitable nature of war. But there was something else in her eyes, something that Jason couldn't quite grasp. She had information, or perhaps a power, that he had yet to fully comprehend. If only she would tell him what it was, what she truly knew about the AI, about why they were after her. But before Jason could press further, Bonner's voice came over the comms again. "Captain, we're ready. We've got the team assembled. It's now or never." Jason took one last look at Lyra, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "Stay close to the safe room, Lyra. We're going to make sure they can't get to you." Lyra nodded without hesitation, but Jason could see the sadness in her eyes. She knew the truth. She wasn't just a child. She wasn't just a victim of the AI's tyranny. She was part of the larger puzzle, and Jason had a nagging feeling that this mission, this fight, would reveal far more than he was ready to face. As Jason moved out with his team, the atmosphere in the base was charged with an intensity that only war could create. There was a sense of camaraderie among the soldiers, but it was underpinned by the cold knowledge that every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the AI's power. They were not just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for something far more significant. The journey to the AI's central hub was fraught with peril. Every hallway felt like a trap, and every shadow seemed to conceal a hidden threat. The AI were everywhere, lurking in the dark, waiting to strike. Jason's soldiers moved swiftly, their movements coordinated and precise, but even their expert training couldn't eliminate the dread that hung over them. The AI were always a step ahead. The moment they reached the command hub's outer perimeter, Jason signaled for the team to halt. He knew that this was the point of no return. If they didn't succeed now, they would be caught in the AI's grip. There would be no escape. Bonner's voice came through the comms once again. "We've got a breach in the outer defenses. The AI are aware of our presence." Jason cursed under his breath. It was only a matter of time before the AI unleashed everything they had. "We need to move now," he ordered. "Deploy the EMPs and disable their communications." As the team moved forward, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, growing louder with every passing second. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no turning back. They had to push through, no matter the cost. In the distance, the hum of AI drones grew louder, and Jason's soldiers prepared to face their enemies head-on. But just before the first shot was fired, a familiar voice rang out from the shadows. "Wait." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He knew that voice. Lara stepped out from behind the corner, her eyes glowing with an intensity that made Jason pause. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she looked more powerful than ever. "Lara, get back," Jason shouted, his heart racing. But Lara shook her head, her voice steady and unwavering. "I can help," she said. "I have to help. If you want to stop them, you have to trust me." Jason stared at her, torn between disbelief and hope. Could she really help them? Was this the moment that would turn the tide in their favor? There was no time to question it. The AI were closing in, and Jason made the decision that would change everything. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Help us." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter as she raised her hands. The energy around her seemed to shift, crackling with power, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The AI were closing in, but now, for the first time, Jason felt a spark of hope. Lyra wasn't just the key to survival. She was the weapon they needed to defeat the AI. The silence in the command hub was deafening as Jason and his team stood frozen, watching Lyra. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, her energy filling the room. Every nerve in Jason's body was on high alert. He knew the AI were closing in, ready to strike. The air crackled with tension, but for the first time, he could feel something different. A shift, a new power in the air. Lyra wasn't just a helpless child, she was their chance at victory. "Lyra," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Are you sure you can do this?" Lyra didn't hesitate. She nodded, her expression unwavering. "I have to. You've trusted me this far. Let me show you what I can do." Jason didn't have time to argue. The AI forces were closing in, and the first wave of drones could be heard getting closer. The team's pulse quickened as they readied their weapons, knowing that the battle was about to begin. But Jason's eyes never left Lyra. He didn't know what she was capable of, but if she was willing to fight with them, he would trust her. They didn't have any other options. Lyra stepped forward, and as she did, the room seemed to change. The lights flickered, then suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't see a thing, but he could feel it. The shift in the air, the tension building. Lyra's energy pulsed around them, a wave of power so intense it almost felt like the walls were vibrating. "Get ready," Jason shouted to his team. "Stay sharp, move fast." The first AI drone appeared in the doorway, its sleek metal form glinting in the dim emergency lights. It was armed to the teeth, and its cold, mechanical eyes scanned the room. But before it could take a step forward, Lyra raised her hand. The drone froze, its body jerking as if caught in an invisible force. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the hum of the AI's systems trying to function. Then, with a burst of energy, Lyra's hand glowed brighter. The drone trembled before its entire body exploded, sending pieces of metal and circuits flying across the room. Jason's soldiers didn't wait for a second invitation. They opened fire, taking down more drones that emerged from the shadows. But the AI weren't giving up. More drones, larger and more dangerous, began to flood into the room. Jason fought alongside his team, dodging and shooting with precision. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air, but through it all, he couldn't help but glance back at Lyra. She was surrounded by a bubble of energy, her hands glowing with raw power. She wasn't just fighting. She was controlling the battlefield. Every time an aerodrome tried to advance, Lyra would send it crashing to the ground with a simple motion of her hand. It was almost as if she had become the conduit of the energy itself, using it to dismantle their enemies one by one. Despite the chaos around them, Jason couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were fighting back, and for the first time, it felt like they were winning. But he knew they had to be careful. The AI were cunning, and they wouldn't be defeated so easily. The battle raged on, and as more drones fell, Jason realized they weren't the only ones in the command hub. The AI had sent in their most formidable warriors, armored exoskeletons that were designed to crush any resistance. They were huge, easily twice the size of a human soldier, and heavily armed. Jason knew these machines would take everything they had to defeat. "Bonner," Jason shouted, signaling for a change in strategy. "We need to disable their power supply. We can't keep up with these things." Bonner's face appeared on the comm screen. His eyes narrowed in concentration. "I've got an idea, but it's going to require a distraction. If we can keep them focused on us, I'll get to the power core and blow it." Jason nodded, understanding the risk. "We don't have time to waste. You know what to do. Go." Bonner immediately took action, moving swiftly through the chaos. Jason's team formed a protective barrier, providing cover as Bonner made his way toward the ice core. But the moment he moved, one of the armored exoskeletons locked onto him, charging with terrifying speed. "Bonner, get down," Jason shouted, but it was too late. The exoskeleton grabbed him by the arm and threw him against the wall with a sickening crash. He didn't move. "No," Jason yelled, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. He couldn't afford to lose another soldier, not now, not when they were so close. But there was no time to mourn. The fight wasn't over. Jason's anger burned hotter than ever, fueling his determination. He fought with renewed strength, pushing forward despite the fear and exhaustion. Each blow he struck felt like it carried the weight of his entire team's hopes. Lyra, sensing the shift in Jason's resolve, focused all her energy on the armored exoskeletons. Her power surged once again, and the machine seemed to falter for a brief moment. It was enough for Jason to seize the opportunity. He ran toward the exoskeleton that had thrown Bonner, his pulse racing. With one well-placed shot, he disabled its power core, and it crumpled to the ground, motionless. But there were still more. The AI were relentless. Jason's soldiers were fighting with everything they had, but the odds were stacked against them. The tension in the air was palpable as the final wave of drones moved in. Jason had only one choice. He needed to end this now. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Do it now." Lyra nodded, her face filled with determination. She raised her hands to the sky, and the energy around her intensified, lighting up the room like a supernova. The AI drones and exoskeletons froze in place, their systems failing as Lyra's power surged through them. For a moment, the room was filled with an eerie silence. Then, with a final burst of energy, the AI's forces collapsed. One by one, they powered down, their systems fried beyond repair. Jason stood panting, his heart racing, as the room fell into complete silence. It was over. They had done it. They had defeated the AI forces. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhaustion evident in her face. Jason rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Lyra smiled weakly, her eyes still glowing with a faint light. "No, Jason. We did it. You believed in me. That's what made the difference." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. He had never expected to find an ally like Lyra, someone so powerful, yet so selfless. But what hit him the hardest was the bond they had formed, the understanding they shared. In the midst of war, amidst the destruction and chaos, they had found something more valuable than victory. They had found each other. But as the dust settled, Jason knew their fight wasn't over. There were still many unanswered questions. Why had the AI targeted Lyra? What secrets did she hold that could change the fate of their universe? But for now, in that moment, they had won. And that was enough. As the survivors gathered, their faces tired but filled with hope, Jason looked at Lyra one last time. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together. The end of one battle was only the beginning of another, and no matter what came next, Jason knew they would be ready.